Welcome to the BlockCrunch Podcast, the show for crypto natives. Every week, we do short but in-depth conversations with the most important builders and investors in crypto, so you can filter through what's noise and stay ahead of the markets. I'm your host, Jason Choi. Nothing on this show should be construed as financial advice, and my guests, myself, and my employer may hold positions in assets discussed on the show. This episode is also brought to you by PARASWAP and Solana, two of my favorite projects in crypto. Stick around to learn more. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch Podcast. Now, recently the NFT craze has taken the world by storm, and the play-to-earn model has also taken center stage, where we hear stories from people making a living just by playing games. And one of the OGs at the heart of this movement is Gabby, the co-founder of Yield Guild Games and the largest crypto gaming guild today. So, Gabby, I'm super excited to have you on to educate us about NFTs and play-to-earn and all the interesting things that are happening. So, welcome to the show.
Jason, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Gabby, you are an NFT OG. You're a gaming OG. You've been in the space for a long time. You've seen many, many things. So can you tell us a little bit about, how you started in crypto and in this gaming world?
Sure. So I've been a game developer for 18 years now. Started in 2003 and was part of the team that made the first ever game to come out of the Philippines. In 2014, I co-founded a mobile game studio called Altitude Games. So we're making free-to-play games for iOS and Android phones. And in 2017, we started taking a look at Ethereum, specifically the concept of programmable money or smart contracts. It was a very intriguing concept, and we wanted to see how it could possibly disrupt the game industry. And I've heard about blockchain before. I've heard about Bitcoin from my fintech founder friends, but like the main business model of that in the Philippines was remittances, and honestly, it was not something I was super interested in. So it wasn't until Ethereum came around and smart contracts were introduced that I got really intrigued. So we started experimenting on it. And it was during this time in late 2017 when CryptoKitties came out and brought down the Ethereum network and introduced the idea of the non-fungible token. So basically unique tokens that you can store on-chain, which are different from the fungible tokens like cryptocurrency. So I thought that was really interesting because now you can have things like game assets represented on the blockchain and then readable by a game showing up inside the game. And now you could have assets that had real value that could be traded amongst players. So I thought that was a really interesting concept. And yeah, that's how I got into NFTs.
That's awesome. I didn't realize you were working on the first game out of the Philippines. What was that called?
It was called Anito. So it was a single player PC RPG.
I see. And it's so interesting because the Philippine ecosystem also has coins.ph, which I think at one point was one of the largest kind of crypto processors in Asia as well. Were you there to kind of see this growing wave of users come into crypto? Did you kind of notice it at that time? Or were you mostly looking into crypto through the lens of NFTs and games?
So I didn't get into crypto myself until I would say mid 2017. Bought my first Bitcoin, I think like September 2017. First ETH at November. So yeah, I would say a late participant in that bull run. Like there was only a few good months of bull run left by the time that I joined. But that's because like I was never really kind of a trader kind of mentality. I'm really a technologist at heart, and it wasn't until we started tinkering with what you could do with Ethereum that I really got interested in crypto.
Got it. And I'd love to kind of shift gears now to talk about Yield Guild Games because now in the gaming world, even outside of crypto, this concept of a guild makes a lot of sense. But for people who are not familiar, what exactly is a gaming guild?
Sure. So guilds have been around since multiplayer games have been around in the late 90s. So guilds are a group of people inside a game that come together to do quests inside the game together. So there have been guilds in games like Ultima Online, World of Warcraft, RuneScape, could be Diablo. So yeah, guilds have been around in games for a very long time. What makes it very different in the NFT and blockchain games is that guilds basically can have their own balance sheet. Guilds can have a wallet. It can own tokens. It can own NFTs. And essentially, the members of that guild, especially if it's arranged as a DAO, are basically like collective owners of those assets. And yeah, that is, I would say, the major innovation that happened and we were one of the first ones to do that as YGG.
Yeah, and I'm really curious. So, can you give us a sense about how big YGG is today? Because it is by far the largest crypto gaming guild. So, I know you guys put out a recent quarterly report as well, and there are a lot of numbers there. So can you give us a sense? How big is it in terms of number of users, maybe any revenue numbers you guys can share?
Sure. So um, the guild itself is a little over 50,000 members. We have just under 5,000 Axie scholars, or people who are playing Axie Infinity, borrowing our Axie assets. And in turn, they have collectively farmed over 51 million SLP, or Smooth Love Potions, in Axie Infinity. So that's a GMV of probably somewhere between one to $200,000 a day. We take 10% of that. 70% goes to the player. 20% to the manager that trains, recruits, and trains these community of players around the world. And so we choose to have the lowest take rate of all of these entities, because we want to make sure that the value goes to the people who are really creating value for the guild.
Got it. And this is really interesting. This concept of scholars. Can you explain that? And is this something that was borrowed from the gaming world, or is something that you came up with?
So the scholarship system is something that was an emergent feature of the Axie Infinity community. So this really interesting quirk of Axie, where there's two ways you can log in. You can log in with your account details, username, password, or you can log in with your wallet by signing a transaction. So now, if I give you, for example, my username and password, you can log into my account, you can access my Axies, and you can start playing the game. But you can't run away with my Axies or my SLP because you don't have access to the private key. Now, the community figured this out and realized that you can do this to create a sort of lending model where you can give out the account details to another person. They can start playing the game and accruing SLP. And then at the end of a certain period, you can cash out that SLP and do a revenue share. So that's how the scholarship system was born in Axie Infinity last year. And I saw it happening organically in the community. And we decided to scale it up by automating it, by adding venture capital to it, and making it something that we could scale, and basically across the world.
And when you say you saw that organically, were you kind of on the Discord for Axie Infinity and you saw people kind of asking about it, or how did you notice that? And how did you decide to, hey, we're going to form a structure around this and actually have a process around funding these 5,000 scholars?
Yeah, so it was actually this time around August last year that the kind of first surge of a play to earn user base emerged from rural Philippines. So in rural Philippines, in Nueva Ecija, and we cover this in our play to earn documentary, people started discovering Axie as the way to earn income during lockdown. They'd been laid off from their local jobs. And these weren't crypto users, these were regular people, gamers, who were stuck at home, getting hungry, no income, and they were looking for a way to make money, somehow found Axie, downloaded the game, started playing, and when they eventually found a way to cash out their SLP, they realized that they were earning maybe 2 to 3 times the amount of money that they were from the jobs that they were laid off from. And yeah, this led to a viral surge in Axie, and around this time last year, it got up to around 5,000 users.
Yeah, and I think when people see these headline numbers, they're all going to be blown away. 100 to $200,000 GMV a day. So naturally, I think people wonder, how sustainable is this, and where are these numbers coming from? So can you maybe help explain a little bit about, for people who haven't played Axie before, how that SLP works, and how sustainable you think this is over the long run?
Okay, so the interesting thing about a play to earn economy like Axie is that it is really a player owned community, which means that you are almost never paying the developers directly anything for value in the game. A lot of the value goes towards the players first. So, for example, if I'm a player and I win matches in the arena, I earn SLP as a game resource. So, that game resource is something that can be externalized or synced to my wallet, which becomes a crypto token. And that SLP, it has value because you need to use it as an ingredient. You need to burn it so that you can breed two axes to create a new one. And if you're playing a game, then you need three axes, which means someone needs to buy three axes. And the ones that are supplying them are the breeders who are buying SLP from other people so that they can breed to supply. So this is how the kind of economic loop works, and it's pretty elegant. Of course, it only works right now when there are new players coming in that you can sell your Axies to. But that said, the Axie marketplace is actually very liquid. It does something like 30 to $40 million of transactions every day. And most of that goes to the players. Axie has a take rate of only 4.25%, which means there's really like most of the economy is really owned by players. And it's a very healthy economy that I think is sustainable for the long run.
Got it. And obviously, a lot of the earnings right now is tied to Axie Infinity as a game, but I also noticed that YGG has made investments in other crypto NFT games as well. So, are there other games that you have your eyes on that you think, hey, this will be really interesting, or games that you see kind of nascent communities forming around as well?
So we have a small team that functions as like early stage investments in NFT games, and we invest in both tokens and NFTs of play to earn games. And so far, we've invested in 11 games. Apart from Axie, we're in Formula One Delta Time, we're in Sandbox, we're in Guild of Guardians, Ember Sword, Zed Run, Nifty Island, and some more. And for us, we want to have a presence in all viable um, play to earn economies. We're going to buy the assets, the NFTs of those games, and then we're going to turn over those assets to our players. And now we kind of have the heartbeat of the entire play to earn metaverse, right? Because our community is playing these games. With games, it's really hard to invest in them because you don't know which ones would take off. So we are doing what is basically an index approach by having our assets in all of these games and virtual worlds. And when something starts to take off like Axie, then we're immediately able to notice the traction because we have a very active user base, and we're able to double down on our investment and really kind of pour the gas, add more capital, buy more assets, serve the community because we see it happening in real time.
And how much of the value of the guild today would you say is from this recurring revenue streams from the users, from the players, versus from the appreciation of some of these investment that you guys made?
Well, we only really track the revenue. Of course, we take a look at what the AUM looks like as well.
Mm,
But like the way we look at it is we take a very long term approach. We actually don't trade any of the assets that we have. So we don't buy assets because we think they're gonna go up in price and then we sell them at some point. Our intention is to buy and use. So which means we're buying any these assets that are productive in the sense that they are earning some kind of token rewards. And as long as the game is alive, we'll probably keep those assets forever.
Yeah, that's so interesting because there's an element of an investment fund, and then you're loaning some of your assets out, and then there are players that are using those assets to generate revenue for you. So structurally, I'm curious: is this a DAO structure? Is this a nonprofit structure or LLC structure, or is there any legal structure that can even encapsulate something as new as this?
We're not a company and have never sold any equity. So we are structured as a DAO, and even with our first fundraising round, we pre-sold tokens via a SAFT. So yeah, like 100% of the value accrual of the DAO is via the YGG token.
Got it. That's super interesting. And I'd love to kind of zoom out a little bit as well to talk about just play to earn as a model in general, because this is something that I think people really only started looking into this year with Axie taking off. And obviously, there's a series of games that are adopting this model right now. So, as a former game developer, do you see this being a very crypto native thing, or do you foresee maybe larger studios with their flagship games potentially doing some sort of a play to earn model as well?
So right now, because of the incredible traction of Axie Infinity, they are now at over a million DAU with 30 to $40 million of daily like marketplace volume, and having done so without being on any major app store and spending zero on user acquisition. It's just really an incredible story. And now developers from around the world have started noticing. And now there's a lot of teams who are crypto native, teams who are game native, teams who are from former big companies who've started new studios are now starting to figure out like their own kind of play to earn game. So now we're seeing like the next generation of products being built with a kind of play to earn system pioneered by Axie Infinity. I think we're still going to see experimentations on what play to earn looks like in different games. I don't think play to earn is kind of a solved business model. I think it's still incredibly early, but we're going to see a lot of really high quality products with I would say different kinds of their own takes on play to earn emerge in the next like 6 to 24 months.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think one, I guess, small critique that some people might have is that the Xe game. I personally, I've played around with it. I think it's quite fun, but compared to say some of the console games that some of us are spoiled with, the PS4, the PS5 titles, the gameplay for crypto games is still pretty. I'd say in the early stage right now. And some might argue that a lot of the people are only paying it to earn revenues on these games. So, do you agree with that kind of argument? Do you think most people are just really playing to earn these tokens, and there's an element of maybe opportunism here where people might move on to the next game that pays the most? Or do you see a loyal fan base kind of forming around the actual gameplay around Axie Infinity?
Okay, so there's different layers to that. So one is if you look at crypto as a game platform, there's a reason why you're playing a Steam game, a mobile game, a console game, and there's also a specific reason why you're playing a blockchain game. It's because there's a game economy that you can earn value from. So that means that is the kind of 0 to 1 moment. That is the important part about a crypto game. Nailing the economics of your game is actually a lot more important than nailing the graphics, for example. Of course, game design is very important, but like there's no use in playing a blockchain game if it doesn't have an economic model where the player can make money. So it's baked into the fun. And I would say that actually Axie is a lot of fun. If you look at crypto, it's really weird where people are obsessing over profile picture NFTs that actually do nothing, right? They sit in your wallet, but they're having endless tons of fun. So I think you really have to define like what is fun. And fun is not just the game mechanic. It's actually the context, the community that is building around it, what people are doing. And if you look at the community of Axie, there's this misconception that most of Axie are just people who are grinding to earn money and they're not having fun. But if you peek into the Discord, if you look at Twitter, people are actually having so much fun because they're doing something together, because they're giving back to community, because they're uplifting lives while playing a fun game. And Axie is actually a really deep game. And the reason I can say that is because there is a very lively esports tournament scene. And you can't have a tournament scene without a deep meta game. And yeah, so the different guilds that are forming, they all have their kind of elite esports teams, and we're one of them as well. We have an esports team. We're actually doing our Yield Guild Open tournament for 64 teams, and I would say that yeah, it is a ton of fun.
Now, before I continue, I'd love to share one of my favorite products in crypto with you. Now, whenever I want to trade a token, instead of going to Uniswap, SushiSwap, Bancor one by one to see where I can find the best quote, I just go to PARASWAP to scan for the best price anywhere. Because PARASWAP aggregates all the popular Ethereum dexes and saves me a ton of time and headache in finding where I can trade something for the best price, and lets me trade in one place. Now, the cool thing is they've also integrated with Ledger Live as well, meaning I can now swap at the best prices directly from my Ledger wallet. So seriously, if you're a DeFi trader and you're worried about the security risks of centralized exchanges, but you also don't want to scour dozens of dexes just to find the best price, you have to check out PARASWAP. So head on over to paraswap.io/blockcrunch. I'd love to also talk about our sponsor Solana, a high throughput layer 1 blockchain. Now, in the past few months, I've probably talked to 24 teams building exciting new projects on Solana, and this is probably why. First, it's incredibly fast with 50,000 transactions per second. Second, it's cheap, with average fees less than a cent per transaction. That means developers can deploy contracts cheaply and also not have to worry about their apps not being composable with others, as Solana does not use any type of sharding or fragmented layer 2 systems. Most importantly, Solana is censorship resistant, with over 950 validators today. So if you're interested in building fast, scalable blockchain applications or want to test out the existing ecosystem of DeFi applications and more, go to solana.com/blockcrunch. That's awesome, and I have so much to unpack there. And this thing that you mentioned, that nailing the economics of the game is more important than the graphics. That's a really unique insight because, depending on who I talk to, if I talk to other game developers, they might think that hey, the gameplay is actually the number one thing. The economics is attached on. So how did you arrive at that insight that hey, the economics is actually the focus here?
Yeah, so you really have to think about like why you are playing the game on each platform, and what you're really after is kind of mindless fun, really good graphics, tell me a good story, then you pick up your PlayStation, right? But if I am after like having a micro economy where I can derive some value out of it, and actually cash out that value. So that is the fun part of blockchain games. And that is why I do it. If I just wanted to kind of have a brainless time shooting with my friends, then I would go play something else.
Got it. Got it. So, would you say maybe the profile of gamers on current crypto games might be quite different from the profile of your average, pay to win type of games like a Fortnite or some other console games?
Yeah, so the interesting thing with we're seeing with play to earn is that the player base is actually very wide, from I would say teenagers to grandparents. So for
Wow.
example, my son plays Axie, I play Axie, my father plays Axie. It's because we are deriving kind of different kinds of fun and satisfaction from it, right? Like I play it because I want to get really good at the game. My dad plays it because it gives him 2x the pension that he's receiving from the government.
Wow.
um, and yeah, and my son plays it as just one of the different games he plays, and so that he can learn about crypto as well.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. And this thing they mentioned about an esports tournament starting as well. I know in the non-crypto world, these gaming guilds, have massive esports teams, and there's these tournaments that are thrown on for hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you foresee that happening in crypto as well, or do you?
Yeah,
And what are some signs
definitely.
that you're seeing there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of money in traditional esports, and traditional meaning I would say non-blockchain games. And NFT esports is still at its very nascent level. But if you look at who is the biggest sponsor right now in the esports world, is actually a crypto company. It's FTX, right?
Mm,
Yeah, so it's a crypto company. So I think as the NFT esports matures, you're gonna see the esports scene and NFTs really can start to get big. And we're actually seeing now that the scholarship model is actually being used by traditional esports teams as a way to drive further monetization. Because typical esports teams have very lumpy revenue, so it either comes from winning tournaments, which of course you can't win every one of them, or from sponsorships, which is also like not that predictable. So we've seen traditional esports teams playing maybe League of Legends or Fortnite to start their own Axie scholarship programs so that they have more predictable revenue from their team. So that's super interesting. So I think as the crypto native esports teams like YGG, there's also ActiGG, Livox Esports, and others start to kind of gain more experience, you're going to see a lot of these kind of traditional esports teams enter the NFT esports scene as well. And it's going to be really lively and a lot of fun for the tournament scene in esports, in NFT esports in the next few years.
yeah, absolutely. And speaking of these esport tournaments, obviously a lot of games, traditional non-blockchain games out there, have this pay to win element where people can actually pay the game to buy certain merch or certain gear. Where in crypto, that's reverse, where players are getting paid. So, what are the conditions for that to continue? Like, where is the capital coming from? For especially for people who are from the traditional gaming world, and they look at this and they think, "Wow, where is this money coming from? Why are gamers getting paid?" How do you explain to them that, hey, this is something that's sustainable, this money that's funding players right now is something that's sustainable?
There are different motivations for someone to shell out money for something. So, for example, status is one of them. In Axie, the most valuable Axies are not actually strong in battle. They are of a collectible status. The origin and mystic Axies, the ones that were created at the very genesis of Axie Infinity, they have a mystic tag on them. And the more mystic tag parts they have, the rarer they are and the more expensive they are. So there are some Axies that are selling for millions of dollars, and they're actually quite bad in battle. But they are some of the rarest Axies in experience, and the people who own these are the ones that want to buy these for status in very much the same way why people would want to own a CryptoPunk. Like who would have thought we would be living in a time where people are paying millions of dollars for a very pixelated photo, right? Yeah, and the answer is status, and it turns out that status is a very very strong driver for people to spend, especially those who have the higher means to afford it. They want to buy things that other people cannot obtain and to be able to show off that they have it. So that's one way that people pay for a game. And yeah, that's one of the answers of where is the money coming from. The other one is there are different types of players. There's a player investor. So and this is the Axie Infinity breeder. So the breeder is the one that buys SLP, uses that to breed Axies and then sells Axies on the marketplace for new players that are coming in. So they're the ones that are actually, so people are asking, like, why does SLP have value? Who is, if I'm selling it and I'm receiving ether or whatever, who's buying it on the other side? So the answer to that is breeders. There's breeders that are buying SLP because they're using it as an ingredient, burning it to breed new Axies. So this is an example of a crypto economic game loop that really works, where the resource token that you produce as a reward has some form of utility elsewhere in the game that gives it value, which means someone would want to buy it and do something with it.
Got it. And the breeders will have incentive to do so as long as someone buys the breeded Axie from them. So as long as the user base
That's
continues to
correct.
grow. Got it.
Yeah, in the short term, yes. In the long term, there might be some added utility to Axie that will be added by the team.
Got it, got it. Yeah, that is super interesting, and that is the major holdup that a lot of, I think, NFT skeptic investors that I speak with have, is that, hey, doesn't this depend on continual inflow of new users to kind of buy Axies to support the whole economy? But it's also apparent from looking at the Axie development docs that there's a lot more use cases and different game types that are coming. That I think will support that expansion that I'm really excited about. And speaking of that, I really love to understand how you guys source for scholars as well, because now you mentioned that there's about 5,000 scholars. How do you find these people, and how do you decide whether to grant them a scholarship?
Oh, they find us. We have basically an unlimited demand for scholars. And yeah, so each of the managers, we have 19 managers from across the world: Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, India, Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, a bit more. It's very community based. So people work in communities where the community managers are the ones that recruit and train these scholars under them. And yeah, through these communities, the people find us and want to apply as scholars. And for every scholar slot that we have, there's probably a line of like over 100. So there is so much demand that it's almost unlimited at this point.
And how do you decide on those countries to start with, or has it been a pretty organic process where it just so happens that from these countries or where the most demand's coming from?
Yeah, so a lot of the geos where Axie became popular for play to earn are in Southeast Asia and Latin America. A
Mm.
couple of reasons for that, of course: relatively low wages in these countries, in Philippines, in Indonesia, where the money that is earning from Axie is very attractive. There's also good mobile penetration rate, which I think is very important as well. Like, for example, Axie would do really well in South Africa, but their mobile data is so expensive that it's hard to actually keep a persistent online connection via like 5G. So yeah, these are the reasons why. But I think, in like, if you think about the opportunity in the metaverse, which is these kind of games and virtual worlds where people can meet and connect with, that have their economic backbone on blockchain. What these blockchain and NFT games represent is equal economic access to these to economic opportunities via blockchain. So no matter where you are, what country you're from, what gender you are, you have the kind of the equal access to the earning capacity by Axie Infinity and other games, and that is really truly revolutionary for me.
Yeah, that's definitely the 0 to 1 moment that we're all seeing here. And you use a really interesting word, the metaverse, which I think different people have different interpretations for. So I'm curious to get your take there. What do you think is actually a metaverse, and where do you see it? Just broad strokes, how do you see it playing out in the next few years?
Sure. So when I say metaverse, I talk about what we call the open metaverse, which are a series of these games and virtual worlds that are persistent. So people can go there. It's multiplayer, people can congregate, and they have a common economic backbone, which is usually in some form of blockchain, where people can meet and exchange value and trade each other and own their assets. So if you watch Ready Player One or read the book, you can see there that people can take their assets and take it with them to basically different games. And that is the promise of blockchain, because the assets themselves don't live inside the game. They live on chain in a common public ledger. That means anyone can read them and interpret what they look like in different sets of virtual worlds. And they're always owned by the wallet or the player that owns it.
Got it. And I think now that we've talked about a lot of these higher level questions about what the metaverse is, where do you see the future of play to earn? I'd like to pivot a little bit finally to talk about the more technical side of things because recently there's a big news that you guys raised, I think about $4.6 million from some of the best investors in the space. So my question to you there is, what are the plans for using the funds? How will you fuel the expansion of YGG?
Sure. So first, we're expanding game operations across the world. We see the Axie scholarship model as similar to an Uber for digital assets. So instead of driving taxis, people are driving Axies all over the world. And we have the advantage over an Uber, for example, because our assets are purely digital. They don't depreciate, and we can deploy these simultaneously all across the world at the same time. So now we have 22,000 Axies, yeah, and just a little under 5,000 scholars. Like, we want to get to at least 15,000 scholars by the end of the year, but that's still not a lot if you think about the total opportunity worldwide. So we're thinking about how can we scale to 100,000 to a million scholars? How can we service eventually a billion people around the world in the metaverse? So I think that is really the greatest opportunity that we have. So we're scaling the Axie scholarship operations. We're also very actively investing in assets of new games. So we don't think that the metaverse will only be played as a single game. It will be a series of different games and virtual worlds that people will go to and play, or depending on what their skills are, or what their interests are. So it may be an RPG, it may be a strategy game, it might be a virtual world game. You may be a player, you may be a blacksmith, a real estate agent in the metaverse. There's so many things that people can do, and we want to be enabling all of these for our player base. And lastly, we want to be buying these assets because we want people to onboard into the metaverse without cost as a factor. Usually, if you participate in play to earn, it means you are buying an asset that is giving off some kind of rewards that can be cashed for real value. It can't be free because like, some asset has to be created. Like, you have to invest in something to be able to get something back. And what the guild does is that we're the ones that we invest in those NFTs and pair them with our player base, so anyone can have access to the economic opportunities in the metaverse, even if they cannot afford to buy these assets.
And Gabby, you used a really interesting analogy there with Uber. So my next question is, after the success of your guild games, there are a lot more different crypto guilds that are spinning up right now. And it kind of reminds me of Uber and Lyft. Maybe you have the same drivers who are part of both Uber and Lyft, and maybe some players who are part of YGG and other guilds as well. So are you seeing that type of behavior playing out, or just broadly, how do you think about how different guilds will differ from each other in the long run?
Yeah, so uh, YGG itself is not one guild. We call ourselves a guild of guilds. So, for example, we have 19 scholarship managers, and they're actually running their own mini guild inside of YGG.
Mm.
We have one sub DAO, League of Kingdoms, that is its own kind of sub guild within YGG. So, of course, there are lots of different guilds that aren't affiliated with Yield Guild. But for us ourselves, we actually have dozens of little guilds inside of YGG. And yeah, so I think that there will be basically maybe thousands, maybe millions of guilds in the future. But what sets us apart is that we are, I would say, an aggregation of guilds that have the technology, that have the capital, that have the community support, that have the I would say, the ownership of the token representing the entire protocol. So that's what kind of binds us together, and with our common values of using play to earn as a way to onboard more people across the world.
Absolutely. And as we come to the end of the conversation, Gabby, one question that I have to ask you is, outside of Axie, what have you been spending the most of your time on in terms of different games?
So I've been spending the most of my time in meetings personally, but if you ask what our community is doing, our community is very active in League of Kingdoms. It's a Clash of Clans type game where the land are NFTs, and if you spend money on top of that land, some of the money that is earned goes towards the landowners in the form of DAI. So Yield Guild bought an 86 plot estate of land, and we have a very active alliance, which is what the guild is called in League of Kingdoms, playing that game. We also have an active community in Splinterlands. We have an esports team in Axie Infinity that is like very active and gearing up for some high level tournaments. And our community is always looking for new games to play.
Yeah, and I can't wait to check those two out as well, and I include them in the show notes. Well, Gabby, this has been really fun. So, for people who want to be a part of the guild or people who want to learn more, what would you say are the best resources for them?
So go to our Discord, discord.gg/ygg, and start interacting and contributing with the community. If you go to our website, yieldguild.io, you can mint the guild badge for free. It's an NFT that is minted for free, just pay gas. And then we'll be activating some utility later that will allow you to participate in guild activities as long as you have that badge.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Gabby. This has been really fun.
Thank you, Jason. I'll see you in the metaverse.
All right.